Okay, hello everyone. Today we're going to do some smoking of the meat. This is the first part where we do the brine. The part of the brine is basically to flavor the meat. The salt goes in there. A couple of centuries ago, the salt was put in heavily, and it was part of a preservative method, as was the smoking. Nowadays, with refrigerators and freezers, we don't really worry about that. What we're really trying to do is just add a lot of flavor here. So the brine, let me readjust the camera here and I'll tip it down for you. Okay, so the thing that we got to remember here is that at no point are we in any way cooking this meat. It's raw, obviously, as we're starting. It's going to continue to be raw, and even after the smoking it's raw. We're only adding flavor. So as raw meat, we need to be sure that you treat it as such, in terms of keeping it refrigerated, thoroughly cooking it when you're cooking it. So what we've got here is some pork chops. I'm opening up some, actually that one's fairly thin, some of them have been quite thick. The brine that I've made is essentially salt water. That's all it has to be, is just some salt water. You really don't want to get too much salt in here. About 1/4 cup of salt for 4 to 5 cups of water is good. It's way better to err on the side of not enough than too much. Obviously, if you get it too salty, you're stuck with it. And as I said, we're not cooking it here in any way. We're just flavoring it. So when you cook it, whether you barbecue it or broil it, whatever it is you're going to do, you still have the opportunity, of course, to put on your normal seasonings as you would otherwise. So you can still add more elements of flavor, more levels of flavor, well after this portion is done. So here we're just going to put in, now what I've added, the reason it's a little bit colored is I've added a little bit of brown sugar. I would say there's 4 cups of water there. Now, I like to use non-iodized salt, kosher salt, whichever. I've noticed, especially when I'm making sausages and so on, the iodized salt tends to color it slightly, flavor it slightly. It doesn't make much difference, honestly, and use what you got. But if you can go either way, then I would probably like, personally, to use the non-iodized salt. So what we're going to do is we're just going to get this in here. Now, we don't want to marinate this for too long, for the same reason as before. The longer it's in there, the more it's going to pull the salt out of the water, and the more of that salty flavor you're going to get that you may not be able to get, well, you won't be able to get rid of in the future. You can dull the flavor of it down. Sugar somewhat neutralizes the harsh, salty flavor of salt. So if you do get a little bit much in there, you could put a little sugar in it. But at any rate, we're going to put this in here because they're chops, and so they're not that thick. I'm probably going to let this just go overnight. It's about 6 o'clock in the evening, so probably by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning I'll put the smoker on and we'll get going on that. If it was a roast or some thicker cut of meat, I would probably leave it in maybe for a second day. Actually, what I would do is get one of those marinating syringes, and I would do the same thing. I would marinate it in the little pool of the briny marinade, but I would also inject it with that marinating needle to get the flavoring through the center. This is not going to penetrate entirely through, maybe 1/4 inch, but on a thin piece like this, 1/4 inch on each side is the majority of it. So that's all we do. It's as simple as that. This is going to go in the refrigerator, sit there for approximately 12 hours, no more than 24 hours at the most. And another thing about the salt too is that if you're using non-iodized salt like kosher salt, it weighs slightly less than the finer granulated table salt that you might use. So if you're using table salt, you might stick with 1/4 cup of the table salt to 4 cups of water, and then, whether you want to put sugar in it or not. When you're using the kosher salt, it's a bit lighter, so you could probably use 1/4 cup of the salt from the kosher salt, and perhaps a little bit more, another teaspoon or something, if you wanted to. But again, it's far better to err on the side of not enough salt than too much, because whenever cooking time comes, whether you freeze these, and that's what we're doing. We're going to do, there's 10 of them in here. We'll probably do, or 8 of them. We're going to do 2 or 3 of these batches, and they'll go in the freezer. We'll be vacuum sealing them, putting them in the freezer, and that'll be a couple a week, or every other week, or whatever it is, for 2 or 3 months at least. So, but the flavor is absolutely mouth-watering. So that's it for this trip, and then we'll move on outside to the smoker in the morning. Okay, so here we are back outside. I've lined the bottom rack here. You can see a little bit with some tin foil. That just makes my life a little easier. The cup on the left is my coffee. The cup on the right is some of the wood chips that I've been soaking, because if you get them damp on a good bed of coals, you get a lot more smoke and they don't burn up as quickly. So the blend I like using is about 50-50 with the hickory and the mesquite. I think, personally, that's just a personal thing, but it's something that I like. It doesn't really matter. There's apple, and actually with pork, apple and so on is probably supposed to be pretty good, but this is my favorite. Okay, so what we're going to do is just get some birch bark in here, for obvious reasons, to get things started. I also have bits and shreds, most of which probably aren't going to fit from the looks of it. Let's see if we can break some of this stuff up a little bit. Now this is going to be allowed to burn for probably 10 or 15 minutes. There we go. Just to get a bit of a sort of a coal base, I guess. And then I'll put the mix of my okay. Now we're going to go very bushcrafty here. Or not. There we go. That was flint and steel. Shh. Okay, I don't think those two are going to fit in, but that will. Now, as I said, this is mostly tamarack or larch, depending on who you are, and it is more of a semi-softwood hardwood combination, but it's still pretty resiny, so I'm not going to let this become part of the smoking process. This is really just to get things going. And then I have my now in this unit here, actually what I have is shredded sawdust, and that works really good in a small electric smoker, but in these bigger smokers with an actual coal type fire, you can get the chunkier stuff, and it works really well, and of course it tends to last longer. You don't have to keep refilling it. Oh, my pet bear is, he's upset with something. Don't eat the neighbors. So we'll just give this a couple of minutes, and then when there's no point in standing here watching it, we'll let it go for a couple of minutes, and then we'll come back. I don't know how well you can see if it's smoking or not on camera, but it's smoking pretty good. I've pretty much closed off all the vents now, that little chimney up there and so on. I don't want to let too much of the smoke out. You can see here the temperature is still pretty much under 100, and the smoke and the meat, oh look at that, it's kind of getting that kind of a golden caramely yellow color. It's been going now for probably 45 minutes. It figures we had a rain shower in the midst of that, so it didn't stop things, but it did it got everything wet and sort of slowed it down slightly, I guess. But I'm just going to let this amount of material burn out. I just put some fresh stuff in there. You see all the smoke it's making. I don't want to lose it all. So we'll let that burn out in another, it's probably going to take about 10 minutes, maybe 15. And then that'll be it for this batch. And we'll consider, I have enough meat for at least one more batch. Problem is we keep cooking them up and eating them as we're waiting for the marinade to take place and so on, so they're dwindling. But I have enough left for, probably got at least another 8 or 10 of them, so we'll get at least one more batch going. So that's about it for now. I'll probably come back just when I'm taking them off the grill for the finished scene as it is, but that's about the way it goes. See you then. Well, there we go. The whole thing probably took a little over an hour. It took about 15 minutes to get the fire going and let it burn down just a little bit. And then get some hardwood in there and let that go. And then probably 45 or 50 minutes, so maybe an hour to an hour and 15 minutes. As you can see, they're just, I don't know if you can see it, but they're slightly yellowish caramely flavor, color. No, they're still totally raw. These are not in any way cooked. As you saw, the temperature never got over 100 degrees, so these are cold smoked, strictly for flavor. This is not something that you can just eat. You've got to cook these thoroughly, just as exactly as you would anything else. There's nothing any different than these other than the absolutely scrumptious flavor. So that's it. Now what we'll do is we'll take these inside. I'll get my vacuum sealer going. As you can see, they're pretty thick and a good size. There's a chunk of meat on there, so I'll package them up 2 in a bag, vacuum seal them. They'll be in the freezer, and the next batch will go on. And pretty soon there's 8 here, so I'll have at least 8 more. And that still leaves me a couple that I can smoke and eat pretty soon. So there you go. That's enough stuff to have once in a while, once a week or whatever for the next 2 or 3 months. And absolutely delicious. So that's it. Have a good day. Okay, so now that we've got these off the smoker, what you want to do is let them cool down. I like to put them in the refrigerator. I don't really want to cover them. What I want them to do is dry slightly. What you don't want to have happen is for too much moisture, and I can see there's moisture in the bottom of this bag. It'll suck up along the edges here and it won't seal properly, and if any of it gets drawn right out of the bag, and it can, and gets down into the machine and gets into the vacuum pump, well, that can be a bad thing. So, take this bag, I'll set these out of the way here temporarily. So when you cut the bags off, and I'll show that here in a moment, you end up with a tube, of course. So you want to seal one end, so you just want to put it in the edge. There's a groove here, and that's where the vacuum comes from, up through this groove. And this little rubber seal here, and this one here, pinches the bag, and the vacuum draws up, and there's a heat wire which seals it. So you want to set this up so that the edge of the bag is about in line with roughly the middle of that trough. Like that. Lock it in place. The 2 buttons, this is vacuum seal, this is just for sealing it. So there's nothing in it yet, so we're going to seal it, and then we're going to wait for the light to go out, which takes about, I don't know, 4 or 5 seconds, or thereabouts. And there it goes, and our bag is sealed. Now you can see here, you want to make sure your bags are big enough, because you can see, I could have pulled that down a little tighter, but there's probably 3/4 of an inch to an inch there that's overlapped. But you know, I like to make darn sure that it's well overlapped there, so that it's a good strong seal. After that, we put in our chops, or whatever it is. Let's chase its chops. Let's put this big long fella in here, since it looks like we've got room. Well, for myself here, I'm going to package them 2 at a time. And I'm going to wipe my fingers here a little bit. So at this point now, we're going to just try and level this up a little bit. Doesn't really matter, I guess it's what you'll see is that the whole bag will pull in around the edges like this, and that's something that you're never going to see when you're using one of those machines that just has a little fan. There's absolutely no power in that. So again, we want to line up the edge of the bag with inside the trough here, and then we close it, lock it. Now this time we're going to hit the vacuum and seal, and it'll do it all in itself. What you'll see is the bag, the strength of the vacuum will pull that bag right tight. That does an excellent job. Now it's going to seal the bag. See how tight that's pulled it? Like that's actually quite, you can hardly push that. That's really pulled it tight. And it's locked. We'll open it. You hear a little as it releases it. And there we go. And that is one tightly sealed. You can see how it's really pulled it in there. That's a great seal. And these bags can actually be reused. I don't usually use them for food twice, but depending on what you put in it and how dirty it is. But you can take this, cut the top off, take your in this case the meat out, and you can use that. And then if the bag is thoroughly washed out, soap and water, same as you would do dishes, I will sometimes use it again to put something else in that's probably not food, but maybe something that I just want to keep dry, sealed up a little bit. So here, and I make these bags, I think I made that one a bit short, but we'll give it a whirl. Take this chop here, he's not overly big. Let's see if there's another one there that's a bit more. No, it's definitely not that one. Alright, I guess we're going to have to just go with it here. Okay. And we'll just make sure that we don't get this too gooey. We want a really good seal. And we'll do it again. Same thing. I'm pre-make however bags I sort of think I'm going to need. I knew I wanted to put 2 pieces per bag in here. We'll just do this again. It's a huge difference when you hear this run. You can hear that vacuum pump going. It's not overly loud, but it's definitely not the same as that little windmill that you see on those cheaper ones in my previous video. And it's coming. There we go. Number 2. And obviously, we keep doing that until we've completed it. As far as making the bags go, I'll make another one. I've got another batch going tomorrow, so it won't really matter if I get ahead of myself here. So, what we want to do here is open this up. Now, when I buy these is in long rolls. You can get the bags pre-cut, pre-made. I prefer not to do that because I never know what I'm going to put in them and how much I want to do. Little cutter right on here. This is just a great big roll. I can't remember how many feet's in this thing, but quite a bit. They come in an 8-inch width. You can also get them in 11-inch width. I have both in this particular case. Now I'm leaving myself a fair bit of room. Just going to zip it across. And there's my tube. And then the tube, I'm going to make a bottom on it. We're going to put it in the machine just like we were before. Close it down. Now this time we're just going to seal it. I'm going to put that in there for that moment that it takes. Let it go. It takes, I don't know, 5 or 6, 8 seconds, whatever it is. I've never paid attention. Certainly not very long. Okay. And we've got another strongly sealed bag right across. And it goes right out to the outside edges. That's all you got to do. It's modestly warm, but barely noticeable. And then we load it with our smoked meat in this case. Man, that never smell good. I could eat these things raw. Honest to goodness. This stuff is just, that's just too good. I know what I'm having for supper tonight. My golly. Of course, it's the same thing I had for supper when I did the batch last night. I don't have to really worry about how the quality of these bags is, to be honest with you, because they never really last all that long around here. They get eaten up before they could probably be put in there without a bag, and they wouldn't have time to go wrong. So we lock it. This time we put it on the vacuum seal. We let it go. that's the kind of pulled-in seal. There's serious vacuum there. That's, I don't know what the inches of vacuum are as far as specifications go, but as you can see, that has really, that's the kind of thing you see in the stores. I mean, that's the type of machine. Theirs are bigger and heavier duty than this, but exactly the same principle. It's just that since they use theirs multiple times a day, this one is probably not a big enough bag, but we'll give it a whirl. I don't know if this is going to seal or not. I've kind of got my doubts, but give it a try. I may have to get a bigger bag for this. Might work. I don't think so. I think I put too many pieces, too much in too small a bag. Yeah, that's not. I have to make a bigger bag for that. I have another batch to do tomorrow, so I've got a few of these extra bags made up. I sometimes will make up a few ahead of time, but only enough for the job, because you know the next thing I vacuum seal in these things could be anything. It's hard to say. So that's it. That's basically how it's done, and that completes the whole series. Actually, you know, from start to finish, we've started off with just going and getting our meat. We've marinated it in the brine. We've taken it from there overnight to let the marinade or the brine saturate a little bit into the meat. We've dried it off so it formed a pellicle, put it out on the smoker for probably around an hour, maybe a bit more. Brought it in here and put it in the refrigerator to let it chill. It does go up to close to 100 degrees in the smoker, so we want to get it right back. The meat is still, you know, it's juicy, and we want it to settle and rest and cool down so that meat is drawn back into the meat. We don't want to lose all that tenderness. And we vacuum seal it, and then into the freezer it goes. And that's all there is for this video. We'll see you next time.